Welcome to Comics League Movie Night. I am Jared. I'm here with JJheat. What's up, brother? And he's muted. In the meantime, Sam, welcome back to the show.
Hey guys, I apologize for being late.
No, it's all good, dude. So today we are talking about Superman Red Son, and I had to get Sam on because as the director producer, I figured you'd have like a lot of great insight for us. So I have a list of questions I wanted to ask. So first off, what was the most difficult thing about adapting the Red Son comic into an animated movie, do you think?
I think it's like, a lot of the other ones. I think the length is one of them. The other thing is because we have to make it producible, right? Because again, we're not like a feature, budget schedule kind of thing, right? And so a lot of it is, projects that we, I guess, decide to do. One of the first kind of things is kind of like, is it doable with kind of the resources that we have and the time that we have? So, it's a large scope story, right? It spans different decades. It's on two different continents or two different sort of cultures, and one of the big things that I remember sort of specifically was that we had to cut down our backgrounds. There was a certain point where production was just saying like, you guys are, like 200. You have to cut 200 backgrounds out of here.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. So that kind of, well, I don't know, depending on the story, right? That stuff happens. But again, it's one of these things that we have to sort of be mindful of. So yeah, I think again, it's just sort of like, especially when you take on a story, right? You got to like sort of like the story, and it's such a great story.
It is,
and it's such a, I love doing Elseworld stuff because again, it sort of puts your mind in like a different place, right? You're sort of tackling it with a different lens, and so I mean, there's certain stories, right, that are kind of like, I feel like, fan favorites or whatever, or people kind of like go, oh, you should do this story. But I don't know, like, again, like I think for us, it has to be like, does that even interest us and stuff like that? And again, this story is just very rich. And I kind of feel like, it's like there's a point to a story, right? It's like, what's the theme of it? What's the point of this story? And so, so you want to do it justice, right? But again, we have to work with these kind of limitations of, how do you make it sort of doable?
That definitely makes sense. And yeah, it definitely makes sense that it'd be like a gargantuan undertaking to figure out how to take this massive tale and make it like an hour and a half max animated movie and still make sure you like get the overall spirit of the film. So it's still like a Red Son adaptation.
Yeah. And, because we're fans too, right? So everybody has a perspective, right? When they consume something, right? And so, we have our sort of takes of kind of like what we like about it and what we wanted to lean into kind of things, or certain things that kind of, we try to improve it, you know what I mean? Cause they're different, right? Because it's like when you read, I feel like when you read a book, you sort of consume it at your own pace, right? You can take as many breaks as you want. You can kind of read a little bit now and then wait a little bit and whatever, right? Your brain refreshes. But when you watch a movie, it's like it starts and it goes. You know what I mean? It's like you have to control the pace of how information is taken. So some stories are very, very involved. Do you know what I mean? And you have to sort of like almost manage the experience a little bit, if that makes sense.
That makes sense.
I mean, this is a whole different thing. But again, the last one I worked on was that, the Doom that came to Gotham, right? Again, that thing, I totally underestimated how large that thing was.
I see.
How much information was in it. So that one, again, it's just like, I needed like at least another half an hour to an hour for that one. But you're in it and you realize too late, you know what I mean? Like you kind of think that, I can I could speed up time here, I could speed up time here, and I could, you know what I mean? But even just alone, it's kind of like you need, well, that one was a horror, right? So you need these spaces where you can like have, you know, because horror is, a lot of it is sort of about atmospheric sounds and those types of things, right? And again, we had no time for any of that. You know? And so again, even with, you know, with Red Sun, because it spanned, you know, there's a lot of characters, you know, it sort of, I think it kind of, there's like three main sort of, you know, periods of time, right? That it sort of, you know, you sort of settle on, right? And you sort of, you explore the story within that decade. And even more, just the end, right? And the thing that we had to cut out, obviously, was the end, because that started expanding way into the future. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was about to say, it's like when I was rewatching the movie today, I'm like, I get why you had to change like the whole time loop thing, but
Yeah.
I think it works for the movie because also it's really confusing to explain to people. Oh no, it's a time loop with time
Right.
travel.
Right. Right. And also, just again, it's like, you know, you're sort of montaging into the future, and you have to design. It's a design nightmare, right? You're spending like maybe 10 seconds, you know what I mean, on each jump, but that's a whole, like, that's an extra like background, you know what I mean? And so you have these, you're creating these, and it's, you know what I mean? It's like you have to like design what the future looks like in these steps, right? And then, you know, even towards the end, you know, when the, you know, Earth slash Krypton explodes, and then the whole loop, whatever, that's, you can't reuse any. Well, I guess you could sort of find some stuff to reuse, stuff like that. But again, it's just like, you know, I think pretty close to the beginning, we knew that had to go, because it was just, there's too many things to design for just so little sort of like payoff, you know?
Yeah, exactly. JHeat, do you have a question about the movie?
Yes, and other than taking the time loop element out of the adaptation, what would you say was your biggest hurdle for this film, pacing wise?
I think that's a great question, because that was one of my big concerns even when I was reading it, right? It's because, and I think you can do this in, you know, comics, but definitely in novels, right? You can sort of, because I kind of felt like the comic book was sort of written almost like a, I don't know, sort of as a series, right? It's like stuff would happen during this time, and then, you know, then you jump like 5, 10 years or something like that until this other thing happens, right? What happens in between, right? What? So I kind of felt like in this movie, it was a thing of like, there needs to be like this push, as far as like, you know, the movie starts, and it's got to like sort of push into the next event that happens, or the generational, or whatever, the time jump, right? And you got to sort of get a sense of kind of like what's been going on since, right? So for me, it was a kind of thing of like, you know, um, the sort of expansion of the Superman Russia need to be felt. Like there need to be this progression that kind of felt, right? So we added things like the Korean War and these other kind of things of what happened during, you know, I mean, just this feeling of kind of like it's spreading and stuff like that, right? Whereas I felt like in the comic, it's kind of like it didn't address that as much, you know. It was just kind of like these things happen, and then, you know what I mean, then you jump, and then there'd be this human moment that happened, right? Or this thing that kind of happens. But I didn't really get a sense of like, you know, well, what's Superman doing this whole time? You know what I mean? Like, what are they doing? Are they just, you know, sort of staying in their own, you know what I mean, areas and stuff like that, and just kind of, you know what I mean, until something kind of happens, right? But so the whole thing of like just the push of kind of like the spreading of it was something that I kind of
And
felt
I'll
like.
definitely agree with you on that, that the original miniseries did kind of skip a lot for the sake of time. So I do appreciate how in the movie you did address smaller conflicts and altering Superman's perspective in the film. So I do appreciate that. Let me just say that above anything else.
Oh, cool.
And that's more of a subtextual style to storytelling, at least from what I've researched and in my experience. Sometimes people do want to see everything progress in real time. Otherwise, other times you can have smaller conflicts, either skimmed over or have a basic rundown. It just depends on the writing style and the structure you're going with.
Yeah, I mean, sort of how you execute it can be done in you know, different ways, but it's a, you know, I kind of feel like when you tell stories, right, you know, you sort of pick a perspective, right, and you got to like honor it, because again, like I think some stories, you know, some movies do it too. I kind of feel like, you know, you know, there was an agenda at the beginning of the movie, right, as far as like what the goal was, right, but then sometimes during the journey, that agenda that you kind of said wasn't actually the target of it, right? You kind of go on the side story, and then you happen to sort of fall back into the main path again, and then, you know what I mean? Then that leads to something else, you know. And you know, again, you can do that in books because there's chapters, right? Like this chapter can just be about this side story that happens, right? And then, you know, at some point, again, there's these things of like, okay, it ends, whatever, and then, you know, 5 months later or whatever, then this thing happens, whatever, and then that calls back on it, right? But I like trying to connect it more. Do you know what I mean? Like kind of, you know, identifying basically the goal, and then making sure everything sort of pushes, you know what I mean? Even on a sort of background kind of, you know what I mean, level. It doesn't have to be the main thing, but it has to be there, you know.
Yeah, because the thing about it is that the movie actually flows a little better than the comic, because the thing about the comic being split up into like multiple chapters is that it can seem kind of clunky going, okay, so this ends, now we're going to this thing, where
Right.
with the alterations you made, essentially adding all this Korean War stuff, it not only adds the world, but I think it aids in like everything flows together better. It feels like it's part of one big story instead of like 5 issues of a comic book.
Yeah, and well, thank you, because again, that was I'm glad it sort of like worked, right? Because I mean, there's even scenes that, you know, I mean, I remember, you know, working with the, you know, I wasn't like the main producer on that, right? Because even though I was a producer on it, right, if I'm working with Bruce Tim is the guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, okay, there
And
you go.
For better or for worse.
right,
Better
right.
for worse.
And so I didn't talk to like, you know, again, I worked with JM or Mark DeMattis, right? Who's again one of my just favorite creator. You know, what I mean, like when he, you know, I read his comics when I was growing up and stuff like that. So
That's gotta be
it was
cool.
such a joy to work with him, and he's such a nice guy, and such a, you know, I mean, his writing is incredible, right? He's like a, he writes characters, right? He writes people. You know what I mean? And that's what I love about, you know, his work. And so, but you know, I mean, even it can be done in like, I remember adding this one scene. It's just a shot of basically Luthor, you know, sort of like looking at the chessboard, right? And then it sort of makes a move, but in the background, you can kind of see that basically the solar lamps are sort of being in its infancy, sort of thing,
Yeah.
right? It's just one scene, but again, I just kind of felt like, you know, we needed something to sort of kind of push it forward. Like, this stuff happens, but Luthor still, again,
It's a nice touch. It's a nice
yeah,
touch.
just kind of like thinking about what am I going to do to sort of, you know, and again, like the chess motif is such a great sort of a visual that happened within the graphic novel. You know, it was an opportunity to sort of like, oh, let's, you know, he's actually there, sort of, you know, playing chess. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like whether he's playing just with himself, he's working out basically strategies and stuff like that.
Particularly when you also have like Lois Lane buys him like two chess pieces that are like him and Superman. So that whole thing is like really being added in there. I love that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I will say this about the original comic: it is limited, but even if it is a limited series, it's structurally flawed because you're skipping from plot point to plot point for each issue, because it's 5 subsequent chapters or 5 conflicts within the overall Elseworld itself. So again, everyone has a different writing style, especially when you're working on a limited series. But the world building you did add in the movie adaptation was a very nice touch, including the foreshadowing for the solar lamps. You definitely helped bring the world to life. So I definitely want to give you credence for that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, you know, obviously it starts with, you know, just, it was such a great, you know, starting point, right? Like the graphic novels is great, right? Just conceptually, it's awesome, right?
Yeah. Such a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And, again, you know, JM is amazing. Again, he's a character writer. And so he, he definitely sort of shaped it.
The one change that I didn't really have an issue with, it was just one that I was like, I don't know why that was done, was kind of changing the dynamic between like Superman and Wonder Woman, because in the comic, she's a little bit more romantically into him. And then in this one, you have the whole, I come from an island of only women. You put it together. So when I saw that, I was like, that's new. It was a change that I didn't really, I mean, and maybe you can like clarify this. I was wondering, because that was also a question someone sent me today. Like, if you and Otis are as the director producer, why that change was done, compared to like keeping it like more to what the comic did.
Well, first of all, let me just kind of say, I think that was, I mean, that decision was made before I.
Oh, okay.
Came aboard.
Okay.
And I mean, it's strange, right? Because we're obviously in a, I don't know, socially, culturally, whatever, we're in this kind of thing where, again, the whole, I don't even know if I'm prepared to kind of get into this debate, but just the whole like wokeism kind of thing,
Yeah, kind of like
I
that.
understand,
Yeah.
like, it's kind of like a negative thing now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, so I don't know how much of that was kind of in, part of it, but, but even just reading it, you know what I mean? Like, I did kind of feel like she shouldn't have to need to pander to him. You know what I mean? It's like, she's not.
Yeah, we get it. We get it.
Not for, emotional sort of whatever reasons, right? Which I feel like is very sort of stereotypical. She needed to be a stronger character, right? She should have her own agenda. You know what I mean? She should understand the situation. I mean, maybe, again, it's I don't want to, just, excuse myself from it and stuff like that, because I think in general, I agree. There's a couple of things, like, that I kind of wish was a little bit softer, right? It's like, I felt like her character it was a little too much, too far that way. And the other thing was, I think, the speech at the end. I remember, bringing it up, and a lot of times, again, we just sort of we just go through it, right? Or you forget things that but just the speech at the end, you know what I mean? I kind of wish that it was a little bit more, look, democracy is the right way, and we beat you because of democracy. You know what I mean? I wish it was a little bit more of like a, of a sort of like, you've come to sort of a better understanding of things. Do you know what I mean? It's more of like, we weren't entirely right and you weren't entirely right. And now it's something else. You know what I mean? And this is how the world needs to move forward,
More on from what to clarify, I wasn't really approaching it from like a wokeness perspective. Really, what it was like, when I was watching this, I'm like, okay, my issue is mainly with the line that Wonder Woman says when she goes, "I come from an island of only women," where I'm like, she does that in every single iteration of the character, and she still dates guys. I don't get, like, I mean, I understand like the one to like it changed a little, like her dynamic with Superman. It's just the idea of like the way that line was phrased kind of was like,
oh yeah. I mean, I don't know. To me, anyways, it didn't bother me as much. It's just that, okay, we're just going to lean into the fact that, okay, she's a lesbian, right? Which sort of makes sense, right? But again, it's an Elseworld story.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, it kind of works.
The characters are going to be, you know what I mean? Just different. They're going to be different, right? They're not going to. And I understand, it's weird, right? Because, I feel like we've done so many of these kind of things, right? And you can't help but, and I get it. Like, when you watch a movie with Batman, you're going to have your sort of like what you want, what of Batman and what you like about Batman, right? And when it changes, you may not like it, or it may like be like, oh, that's not the Batman I like, or the Batman I know, kind of thing, right? And so, I mean, I kind of get it and stuff like that, right? But again, it's just, I think just working on these, I'm kind of like, okay, these are entirely different characters, with especially like something like Gods and Monsters, right? Which visually looks different. Even though Batman's like a vampire, and you know what I mean? And Wonder Woman is from Apocalypse. She's
I love that movie.
It's they're more different, so maybe those were a little bit easier to sort of like kind of go like, okay, that's kind of a mirror, some sort of reflection of a Wonder Woman.
Dave kind of also brings up an interesting point. He says the thing with Wonder Woman in this movie is that her disdain towards men didn't lead anywhere because Luthor ended up saving the world anyway.
Kind of, but that's more so that around the era this Elseworld was made, the Amazons were mostly depicted as for man hating. That was a core trait of the Amazons at the time when this Elseworld was made. So I feel like that's more so for consistency more than anything, but that's just my opinion.
And I kind of feel like it's the world is, again, during it's a different time, right? It's definitely during a war-torn world at that point, right? It's sort of a heightened version of, I can't even remember the term of it now. My dad was an engineer and stuff like that, and the whole reason we were able to, get into America when I was, obviously very, very young, right? It's because they needed an engineer because of what's it called? It's not like the arms. It's sort of the arms race. It's sort of the. I forgot what the term was. But again, it's just, during that time, especially like during the 80s and all that kind of stuff, right? It's kind of like it was Russia versus America kind of a thing, right? The whole Reagan era and stuff like that, right? And so I feel like this is like a heightened kind of version, of the older mentality when, again, world wars happened, you know what I mean? And so people had to sort of pick their sides and, again, even Themyscira, right, from back then, right, their whole secession from man, right, was almost like a political kind of move, right? They chose to basically, be hidden and stuff like that because they didn't want to, associate with men, which they thought were, oppressors, evil, whatever you want to call it,
I will say one of the other cool like changes you made is like when Wonder Woman shows up to like save Superman from the Green Lantern Corps, which by the way, I love this version of the Green Lantern Corps because it's just basically the Marine Corps with cloned Green Lantern rings. And then if you pay attention, you're like, watch out, Gardner and Stewart. And I'm like, I see what you're doing here. I see what you're doing here. And then when like I just love the design of Diana with like the white hair and the fully white, like essentially Greek, like a goddess costume. I felt that was like a really cool design choice.
Oh, awesome. Wow. Yeah. I can't remember. Was that the book?
I think.
I want to say so.
Yeah, because her hair definitely, right? Because the whole, in saving, I'm sorry, it's been quite a few years since I like.
Take your time. Take your time.
Take your time. It's all good.
But it was, I don't know. I just think it was neat because it was kind of a thing where, she was, it's almost like she had some sort of traumatic stroke or something, right? That caused her hair to go white. And then when she comes back and you see her again, she's like,
okay. The white suit is not in the book. She comes back because the way that they explain the comic is that as like her like longevity is like a gift from the gods. When she broke the lasso, she essentially broke that pact with the gods, so they took away her longevity. So she was like more old in the book. But yeah, like I said, I like that change because it makes, first off, it makes sense for her, and it's like it just looks so like it's sleek and it's really cool.
Yeah. And it's almost like, again, she went back and she kind of, again, like recovered in Themyscira, and she sort of just, was more Themysciran, right?
So, because she kind of looked young again. Because when she broke the last one, even in the movie, she looked older, and then when she left and came back, she was younger. So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Let me see another question that we have here. The Tevia asks, I'm wondering if you're able to do a sequel to Red Sun, how would you do it?
Oh wow! I mean, I don't know. It's weird, right? Because it sort of covers what it's supposed to. And again, if we had time to loop it back around, it's sort of like that's the cycle. Then it would come back and. I don't even know what a follow-up would be, like a different cycle. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, because they haven't even done a sequel comic either. So
Yeah, yeah. I think it's pretty self-contained, right? It's kind of
Mhm.
like
Yeah.
it's just this was one Twilight Zone episode of what I mean? Like he
Yeah,
landed in a different
exactly.
place, but then it still evolved into this loop, right? Where again, like as long as they keep getting to the point where they can advance and they don't, the Earth doesn't destroy itself. Um, but it will at some point, right? With Krypton.
And
But there will
that's
always be this, I don't know, savior that
Cycle.
comes
Mhm.
back that
And
re
honestly, that's one of the good parts about DC Elseworlds is that a lot of them are like self-contained stories. We have a beginning, middle, and end, so you can get a complete story. That's one of the problems that JHeat and I find reading like ongoing comics is that the story never ends.
Yeah, I feel for them too because I think that's why like whenever you read like a wiki
Yes.
on a
Oh
character,
God.
it's so bizarre, right?
I
It's
know.
like the Magneto one is like he does this thing and then he sort of dies and then he
He
comes back
was
to
Zorn, but then he
child,
wasn't Zorn, but
and
then
then
he came back and he was Zorn.
right, then he took over somebody's I don't know. I'm making this up, but like what I mean? You got to think of these creative ways of how do you just get that person back so we can tell another Magneto story.
Yeah, yeah. That's always like one of the really, really weird things. Tavia also asked, so the decision making behind like changing Batman's origin from the comic to the one in the movie, and was that just more like to like link Batman and Superman together for that confrontation?
Wow, I can't even remember what it was in the comic now. I mean,
In the comic, I think it was like uh Peter Roslov, like okay, so the Waynes, if you will, published anti-Superman propaganda. So Peter Roslov, who I guess was the head of the KGB, had them killed.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I kind of feel like because he just was a different voice to it, right?
Right.
Because he was basically the underground, right?
Mhm.
Um, the I guess the rebellion against basically this, he sees basically the errors in it and stuff like that, right? Which I think again is the spirit of kind of what
Yeah,
was
Yeah.
intended in the comic. Um,
100%.
and so I think it's just keeping the spirit of it, but sort of having to sort of simplify him a little bit more or make him instead of because we can't sort of set up all these things and take like a lot of
Mhm.
screen time for it. So how do
Yeah,
we sort of say the same thing but get to it sooner? And sometimes it's making it
that
more
that's
extreme.
that's what I always tell people whenever like they're complain about changes to an adaptation. And again, I get it. We love these books. We want to see them properly represented. But a lot of times I tell people, listen, as long as they get the overall gist of the story and what the basic plot of the story is the same. Because yeah, well, like you said, some stuff is not going to translate 100% well, whether or not it's comic to live action, comic to animation, even animation to live action. So you're gonna have to make like some compromises along the way.
Yeah, and I think again, like in things that you can sort of like go at your pace, whether even
Yeah.
like video games, right?
Hmm.
Stories in video games, right? It's
Hmm.
like you spend a lot of hours sitting there, starting with books, right? Reading
Yeah.
it, right? And again, if you're like lost, you're like, oh, let me go back and read it,
Yeah.
right? You can just pause it and go back, right? But when you
Hmm.
watch a movie, you know, you're not going to just pause and go back, right? You have
Hmm.
to. It's meant to be consumed in one sitting,
Yeah.
right? And so you have to be mindful of pace, mindful of information, and even though like people love especially if it's something something that they love, right? All the extras is just like extra candy. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? But if you do that on a first viewing, whatever, it could be too much. You know what I mean? You're like, I can't even like taste what this meal is anymore because there's so many mashed potatoes and like extra things on it that I don't even know what this thing is anymore because I'm distracted by too many things. Right? Again, like I keep, you know, I hate to keep going back to again the Doom that came to Gotham, but again like that thing had so many pieces in it, right?
That's a big
Right.
book.
and there's all these characters with really interesting backgrounds and really interesting kind of things, right? Like again, even I forgot his name, but there was um, there was another sort of like the brother or something like that that shot up. Did he get killed or shot himself in Red Sun? But that whole character we had to like omit just because and streamline to something else, because that's just one more character with a story that we had to tell.
Yeah.
That, you know, it's sure it's heartfelt and it's
Impactful.
yeah, it's impactful and stuff like that. But again, as far as like contributing to the whole and the thrust of it, it's not entirely needed, you know? And so, you know, we just sort of, there's certain things again that's painful, but you have to sort of cut them out because again, it's just
necessary.
There's too many pieces to like keep track of, and then you gotta like then you have to like wrap up that guy's story. Do you know what I mean? And then, you know, and then even if you sort of do it well, if you do that too many times, there's, you know, like 5 people that you got to jump and then they die. Whatever, then fans complain like, oh, why is that person even in the story? Because, you know, so it's in a lot of these things, unfortunately, it's about sort of targeting what the main thrust of the story is, and then sort of kind of going like, okay, what pieces are important, you know, in telling the story, and what pieces are we like, okay, let's just combine those 2 characters, or we'll just lose the character, or we sort of add that person's what they represent or what is important informationally that's just going to get, you know, tied into another character.
Yeah. Dave asks if you had the budget to do a 2.5 or 2 hour to longer version of this movie, what are some things you would have added?
I don't, you know, again, like I'm really like interested in like character and things like that, you know what I mean? And setups. Like, so a lot of times I kind of feel like, you know, I think it would have been great if we could have done like a series. Do you know what I mean? Even if it was like a 6, even 4, you know what I mean? Where we could sort of break it up into like, you know, things and spend a little more time and sort of explore these characters. You know, that would have been awesome, you know, because again, like, you know, the time loop thing is a thing that could have happened, you know. That seems to be the one big thing that like most of the people sort of complain about that we took out, you know. I think we could have added more characters, because again, it's just like within each episode, right? Because in a movie, right, there's still, whenever you consume something, right, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Yeah.
Right. But if you have chapters, you can have a small beginning, middle, end within that chapter and still be okay, because then you move on to the next chapter, there's another beginning, middle, end, right? In comics, it's the same thing, right? Each issue, right? But in like a show or a series with an episode, you can sort of do that. So it just gives you a lot more sort of like room to kind of explore things, right? But when you have to like tell one story in an hour to 2 hours, you know, it's got to have its basic, you know, beginning, middle, and end, or else it just structurally just gets really weird, and I think you get exhausted as a viewer.
The other change that I hear a lot of people talking about, and that Tevya asked about it, is like Superman actually killing Stalin, because in the comic, I think Stalin just dies of old age. And what do you think of that change to the plot when you put it to animation?
Again, I kind of feel like a lot of times we have to sort of I mean, I like it for kind of what it is, right? Because again, it's just it's the point where basically Superman understands that I need to take control, right? In the beginning, it was a thing of like, you know, I'm a dutiful soldier, and I'm a soldier to this country which I love and I believe in, right? So again, I think dramatically it's the point where it's like he's trying to be the good soldier, right? And then you know, the whole thing with I forgot her name, is it Ilyana?
Yeah.
Lana?
She's essentially the Lana Lang of the Red Sun universe.
Yeah, and she's, you know, even within the story, right, she's sort of like the thing that makes him realize that outside of sort of, what the propaganda is, there's a thing that's happening,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And even though, again, in the beginning, he sort of fights it because, again, he's young, like,
Mm-hmm.
when you're young and whatever, and you just kind of think like the government's messed up, you just do this and whatever, and they'll fix everything, right? That's who he was until he gained the burden. I always refer to it as like the burden of the crown, right? When you actually have to like, I think in theory it's easy, right? But when you have to actually deal with masses of people and you have to make rules that apply to everybody in every sort of situation, you start making these broader rules, right? So again, he
Mm-hmm.
becomes the thing that he sort of, rebelled against in the beginning, right? And so I kind of felt like, again, in the beginning, he was hopeful, and he was the things have to be better, and I'm going to make them better, right? And then he becomes the ruler, and then his lobotomizing people, making them into robots,
I was like, that is hardcore.
Right, and he's just like, oh no, but at least I'm not killing them. Do you know what I mean? So I don't know. I always find these things really interesting. You know what I mean?
And he was like, don't worry, it's only temporary.
Yeah.
See, the thing I love about Red Son, the comic and the movie, is that it shows that no matter where Superman lands, he's still Superman. He's still looking out for humanity. It's just the way he goes about that changes.
He becomes misguided as more time goes on.
Yeah, it's still from a position of some form of altruism.
Right. And I think even the story, it's like there is no answer to it, right? It's more of just an exploration, sort of like, okay, here are, two different philosophies of how things should be done, and then we explore a little bit of kind of like, well, what does that evolve into? You know what I mean? And again, there's no answer. They're all flawed, right? So
plus the fact, here's the thing, when you see the movie, what's kind of cool about it also is that you get the role reversal of like the Soviet Union in the US, that now into Superman, the Soviets are like rising and the US is kind of declining, which is kind of interesting because it kind of shows that in some ways Superman is right. A lot of this stuff leads to prosperity. It's just, what are you willing to sacrifice to get to that prosperity?
Right. And I think it's interesting too, even the whole, Lex Luthor and Lois Lane kind of thing of like Lex Luthor sort of becoming a monster also, you know what I mean, in what he thinks is right. And then having to sort of realize that, you know what I mean, at the end, you know what I mean? And then sort of retiring and saying, I need to give this up, and I need to sort of give this to people that are, more equipped to do this, So I don't know, again, outside of the basically kind of what it is, I think there's a lot of great sort of, I don't know, lessons in life in a way, do you know what I mean? And explorations and sort of what, leadership is, making hard decisions, and you make these decisions and you got to stand by it, you know what I mean? And, again, even the whole thing of like Superman at the end, just being this very lonely man in his castle, you know what I mean? With his robot. And I don't know.
And what's interesting about that is that in school, I studied political science. One of the things that always fascinated me is like that whole freedom versus security debate. And they kind of touched on this in the Injustice comics and movie. And I feel like with this one did a little bit better because the characters still acted consistently, whereas in Injustice, everyone acts like they're in The Boys. But Master Sergeant asks, Sam, is there a DC project that you would love to do but hasn't been presented yet?
It's I get this question a lot, and I gotta be honest that I haven't read a comic outside of the ones that I have to work on, right, for a couple of decades. I have no idea what's going on with comics like nowadays. I'm a total 80s, 90s, not quite, you know what I mean, the super old, you know what I mean, like silver, golden age kind of stuff, and for the most part, I kind of feel like we've tackled most of the big ones, right, of that era.
Maybe Nightfall?
You would have to set up for that.
No, I know, but here's the thing: we got Under the Red Hood instead of having like Death in the Family. So there was a way to do it, and plus with that one, if you make it, you can make it 3 movies because it's just 3 different volumes.
Right, right. I mean, everything's on the table. Like everything that people say, right? Like, ugh, I hate bringing up Killing Joke, right? Because I think
Oh yeah.
I think just internally as creators, right? Nobody wanted to touch it because we knew it was problematic, right? It's been on the table since the beginning, right? And none of us really wanted to do it, right? And until sort of we were just, sort of, strong armed into into doing it, And
Can't say I blame you.
yeah, I mean, it was problematic during its time, and if you do it, you have to sort of you got to honor it, right? And it's messed up, right? And
Oh, yeah.
it's supposed to be messy. So there are probably like reasons. Do you know what I mean? Why? But Nightfall's on the table. It has been on the table. Even like before Red Sun came out, people were like, "Oh, when are you going to do Red Sun?" You know what I mean? So um, so they are being looked at. It's just a matter of kind of somebody partially. I don't know. Just Warner Brothers is kind of a mess right now, and so
You don't say.
yeah. And so, I mean, we don't even know like what's, because at least before it was a thing like, we knew we were going to do it, right? Like right now, again, like I don't work for Warner Brothers right now, right? I'm actually unemployed right now. But it's just because there's no projects there, right? And so, we'll see like what, if they decide to sort of, move forward with doing animation. Because right now, I think that they're more worried about the movies and kind of what, they want to do there, but just because of the change in leadership. And so, again, animation is, I think, very low on basically their concerns list. So, they're doing what they can to sort of, kind of say, hey, we'd like to do some stuff. Do you want to do some stuff? But I kind of feel like, again, we're very low on their sort of priority list as far as getting back to. So.
I will say I want to give you props. I rewatched The Killing Joke after last time you were on the show, and the first half of the movie I'm able to appreciate a little more. I still don't like the Batman Barber stuff, but the other parts I'm like, okay, I can see this now. I'm kind of a little more aware of it.
Okay, cool. I'm glad. I mean, it was a tough thing to do. You know what I mean? For sure. And
For sure.
And they. Again, even decisions that that were made before I got onto it, right? Yeah. I'm again as sort of a director that works on project to project, especially during the time I was working between Bruce and James Tucker, right? I'm kind of halfway finishing something and then I have to jump onto something else, right? And so again, like it's their job to sort of hopefully get it into a shape that I can actually start working on it. So a lot of times, especially during that era, these stories were sort of already in discussion. The writers have already started working on it, working with, again, whoever the supervising, or the lead producer was. And so by the time I got it, it was supposed to be hopefully in a shape where I can start pushing it around a little bit, And so, but given, again, these hard things have been put into it already, right? And again, I think, it was supposed to be, I don't know, messed up, right? Again, people kind of being pushed to their limits, right? That's the whole thing.
It's the story, so there you go.
Bad day thing, right? And so, people are supposed to be having their bad days. You know what I mean? Like they're pushed to a brink where they have to like make decisions, right? And again, it's the abyss. It's the, anyways. But I'm glad, I
was able to appreciate it a little more. Yeah, I was like, okay, I can kind of see where this is like contributing to the story. So I'm like, oh, okay, I'll take it.
Okay.
And another question I had is from viewers and other co-hosts of Comics League that unfortunately couldn't be here was, what was it like working with the voice cast for this movie?
Oh, they were so good, right?
Really?
Because so when this movie came out, right? Because normally we do like this press thing, right? And there's one slot where basically we have to do a New York one and we have to do an LA one, right? So we were able to do the LA one, and we were going to go to New York, but because of COVID just hit, they canceled the New York one, right? And so like Disha Baker, Amy Acker, Jason Isaacs, like I just remember being at the thing and everybody was just like, wow, this is a really sort of like complex story. And I feel like they were all just, really into it. But they were all like really just gracious people, and really committed to it, right? Because again, like he's just saying something like that, you can tell that they're in it for the art, right? Like they actually, because, I mean, I'm not going to name names, but there's sometimes we run into actors that are just like, this is a cartoon. Who cares? It's just like, I don't know. I guess I'm just doing it for the money or whatever. I'm just telling what it is, and I'll just read it and whatever, and let me get out of here. But I kind of feel like these, again during that panel, especially just sitting in the green room, kind of preparing and stuff like that. I remember talking to, quite a few of them, and everybody was just really sort of into it and just really like, wow, like this is a really like involved story.
Yeah, I love finding actors who like really like who are really into the material, because I always say you get your best performances from like either fans of the medium or material, or also a character or actors that are willing to like go the extra mile. And you definitely get that from the cast of this movie, even from an auditory perspective.
Yeah. I mean, it's because a lot of times, right, when we make these things, we're, we have the script and nothing's animated and it's barely storyboarded, if that, right? And so the actors have to kind of come in, and, Wes Gleason, who was the voice director on this, paints like a very good picture for them. And you sort of, again, they're acting to kind of what they see in their mind, right?
Yeah.
And so by the time we actually get animation back and all that kind of, in a rough form, we do, ADR, right? Additional dialogue records, right? Where they come back if there's certain parts where, we need this to be reread a certain way. And yeah, it's just great, especially when, like they're just like, oh man, that's what it's going to look like. It's like, I could do it better, and they have an idea of like, okay, I know what I need to be doing now, or how this needs to be delivered. So again, just, from top to bottom, just really committed people that sort of, you know what I mean? I've been in one where, again, an actor came in for an ADR and is looking at the thing, is like, oh God, he's crying, and you're like,
really?
all right, that's a great, you know what I mean? Like, attitude.
That's a good sign.
Yeah.
But Dave says it's ironic that Jason Isaac was Superman, because he would make an awesome live action Lex Luthor. I agree on that.
I can see that.
I've seen him do a lot of live action stuff, and yeah, he could definitely pull off Lex Luthor. So let me see if there were any other questions here that seem interesting. What's your favorite scene in the movie and why?
Wow. I gotta say, I love, oh my gosh, I forgot her name. Winter, I forgot her last name, but she played Lana.
Okay.
Right? And so I love the beginning when they're children.
Yeah.
And I love when he finds her again in the gulag.
Yeah.
I think that she is the heart, of the purity of Superman. And so, I mean, I think it's, again, the relationship stuff. I think maybe it's because I'm getting older, but that's the stuff that sort of,
it works.
I mean, I love like the Superman and the Superior Man fight also.
Yeah,
like,
that is so good. When he
Yeah.
turns into Bizarro, I'm like, yes.
Yeah. And, I had such a great, just people working on that. Oh my gosh, it hasn't been that long ago, but again, like my brain hasn't been in there, so I'm forgetting like people's names.
The cool part going back to Lana is that you even echo that at the end of the movie when he's pushing Brainiac's ship away.
Yeah, and that's something we added. Do you know what I mean? We just took her dialogue from something and we put it over that, right? Because again, I just kind of felt like I needed to. She's such an important part to him. She's the purity of the dream, basically, right? Of like, the love of the country and the love of kind of why he's on this path. And so I just kind of felt like at the end, as he's basically giving his life or whatever, to save the planet. It's her voice of, why he's doing this, so.
Plus it's like a good bookend to the movie because this whole journey starts because he finds her in that gulag, and then it's like and then those same words are echoed as he's finally, like you said, just saving the Earth.
Right.
That's dope. Tavia asked, question, speaking of Red Sun, that reminds me, how did you feel about the Batman fight against Red Sun, Superman, and Wonder Woman? It wasn't really a fight against Wonder Woman. It's just Superman just shows up. And even that's the way it was in the comic, too. He just shows up and Batman's like, I captured Wonder Woman because I'm Batman. That's why I was like, okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Even if it's like not the Bruce Wayne ridiculously trained Batman, it's still Batman.
Yeah. I feel like it was pretty brutal. You know what I mean?
Oh, yes.
It was just a bloody bludgeoning fight. You know what I mean?
It was like, I'm gonna make a god bleed.
Yeah.
And then when he like closes him in that dark pit and he goes, yeah, you're staying here for the rest of your life, dude.
Yeah.
And then I just one of my favorite moments of that scene. It's kind of macabre, but it's kind of funny. Where like Superman is like going to Batman. He goes, "Yeah, I'm gonna brainwash you now." And then Batman's like, "Nope, detonate bomb." And I'm like, "Did you really think that was gonna work?"
Right. It's some of the stuff that again, when I was a kid reading comics, right, which I loved, was just those like, oh damn moments, right? And so I just feel like, especially during that fight, there was quite a few like, oh damn moments, right? It's like, you think I have the upper hand and then you don't, right? Or like, I've beat you so bad and I've locked you in this thing, right? And then the power goes out. And again, even just the way we did it, right? Where it was dark and his eyes just
the eyes, I love that. That's so good.
And then he just busts out of there. It's like, okay, now you're screwed.
Yes, I love that. That was like one of my favorite scenes. Is like, it's just dark. The lights just go out. It's completely black screen. I was like, that was. But I definitely like the whole like because Batman was beating him to a pulp, and I'm watching this and I'm like, yeah, now I see where like Dark Knight Returns and all that. I'm seeing echoes of that even in the comic too. So I'm like, oh, that's cool. I love that.
Yeah. So again, these things are fun because there's a momentum to scenes, right?
Yeah.
And so again, like we wanted it to be like, even things like like the death of Superman, right?
Yeah.
It's just about a believable thing of like he can't just get punched a few times and then is out because he's Superman, right? It's got to be a long fight with just collateral damage and just, brutal things happening, right? And so, again, there's a different tone for a fight, right? This isn't the, oh, look at this cool move and look at this, like, different fighting style that I kind of have, right? And this one is just supposed to be, I'm beating you, basically. You know what I mean? In a very just brutal kind of way. And again, we wanted it to be like extra brutal because he's going to come back, and then he's just going to be pissed. Where it's just like, okay,
like,
now
it's my turn, bro.
Right. So you got to like, you know what I mean? It's like it's this ebb and flow. You know what I mean? You want to almost go too much because you're kind of going because he's got to deserve to die. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like if you don't make Batman sort of quote unquote bad enough. Then when he dies, they're gonna be like, "Oh man, why did they kill Batman?" I mean, he just believes in this thing, whatever. And he didn't hit you that hard, and he just kind of threw you in there, whatever. But if you're brutalized,
Yeah.
anywhere, it's just like
if
you should probably
if he's
stop.
like smashing your head into the
Really stop.
ground,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, you should. Okay, now you should probably. Okay, that's too much. You should stop. You know what I mean? Where so he kind of, I don't know, deserves it in a way, right?
And the other thing too, it's like comparing this to like the death of Superman is that when you think about the fight against Superman in Doomsday, it's kind of like you're having two like extreme super strength characters like punching the crap out of each other, as opposed to like you have a dude punching a god essentially.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like even with the Death of Superman, I love how each punch like has weight to it, because again, it's Superman, but he's clearly not holding back at this point. He's like, nope, I gotta put this dude down. Whereas as with this one, it's kind of the same thing. It's just Batman's like, okay, no, bang.
Yeah.
Which it is kind of humorous though, the way Batman just goes, nope, I'm out, boom.
Yeah.
Which it still works, and like the way the blood goes and everything like that. I really love that. So, JJheat, do you have any concluding questions for Sam?
Concluding questions is what made you continue to work on animation and with comics in general, even though you haven't kept up with them? I probably could have worded that better, but that's my final question.
This leads to sort of a bigger, longer sort of answer, which I'll try to sum up a little bit. But I kind of feel like when you're young, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't know exactly the path that you want to go, but you kind of know a general direction, right? I knew I wanted to do art, right? And so I drew, I loved comics. I studied illustration. I never really thought too much of animation, right? Because to me, animation was in between, right? And I was just like, oh, that seems so tedious, right? And so when I was too slow to be a steady comic book artist, right? Because you have to do like 22 pages a month, right?
Yeah.
And in comics, basically, you get paid by the page. If you don't do a page that day, you don't get paid, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't prepared for that. And so animation was booming at the time. And I had some friends that knew people in animation. They were looking for people, right? I think Sony Animation had just sort of started, right? They weren't in the animation game. They had just opened up and they were trying to, crew up basically their TV animation department. So I had talked to basically, a mentor of mine about it. He was like, oh, I would recommend going into animation for any artist, right? Because you're going to have to learn it. You have to draw everything, things you don't want to draw, but you'll learn, right? And you got to do it fast, so your speed will get up, right? And that was the thing that I was mostly concerned with, right? Because my speed. And so I went into it. I ended up staying there for about like 4-ish years, right? Things happened in the industry. Pixar came up, and everybody was saying basically 2D animation is going to die. Blah, you're going to have to learn computers, and 3D animation is going to basically take over 2D animation, right? And so I had a friend at the time that was working in video games, and so he was like, "Hey, they're looking for people, blah blah blah," and I submitted my portfolio, and I got a job, so I left. And so even though I was researching video games, because of I was sort of just out of comics, I would still get calls sometimes to be like, hey, can you do like a pinup, or can you do like a cover or something like that, right? And during that time, so I have to do it at night. And I think just during that time, I realized like, I think drawing is really tedious. I don't know if it's really my thing, right? What I really missed and was really fulfilling for me was storytelling, right? Even though I was working, back at Sony, right, on things like Godzilla or like, Starship Troopers or, things like that. I really miss the sort of puzzle and the psychology and the characterization and just kind of what you can do with it, right? Again, you get a script, it's just words on a page, dialogue on it, right? But you can really sort of choose to highlight certain words, certain sentences, certain thoughts, or you downplay it, right? And so that's the sort of art, I feel like, of it, right? Because you shoot on a wide or whatever, and then you don't pay attention to it. You shoot really close, and you're paying attention to what they're saying, right? That's a very broad, basic kind of thing, right? But things of that, right? The psychology of sort of the angles, I suppose, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can box them in. You shoot them in a down shot if they're sort of what do you call it? Passive submissive. You shoot them on an upshot if they want to be heroic. The language basically of the tools, right? And that stuff I was really, really sort of like getting into, and so I missed that. And then I basically, got back into animation, and I realized that drawing like a comic book page kind of, I don't know, just the technique of it's so technical, right? It's creative,
Right.
obviously, but again, it's painful for me. And I don't know. Again, I just kind of, I think, and my point is like, I think you discover things about yourself. You know what I mean? All I knew is I liked art. I kind of, got into these sort of art jobs. Animation, again, wasn't even on my radar when I was going to school. But getting into animation, and how close you are associated with it, right? Because when you're a storyboard artist, you're the actor, you're the director of photography, you're somewhat the editor, right? You choose the pace and when you cut, you frame it the way you want it. Am I close? Is it an upshot? Is it a down shot? Or is it staggered? Is it Dutched? And you sort of do a rough pass as far as like, I'm going to cut to this, and I'm going to cut to this, and what are these people doing when I cut to that? And even just sort of the psychology of it, kind of like, you know what I mean? It's kind of like when you shoot somebody, again, the upshot, downshot kind of thing, right? But when you shoot somebody on the back, what does that feel like, right? What does that say to you? When you shoot them from the front, what does that say to you? Do you know what I mean? So there's a whole sort of language and psychology, but which I don't know, I just loved it, and again, the pacing, the edit of things, it's I don't know, I guess that's just the thing. I just realized that's what I really liked. And so that's why, I stay in animation.
Thank you.
That works. So to conclude, I did this last week, but I want to also reiterate my thanks to you, because all these movies that particularly all the ones that you've worked on, basically built my childhood and like aligned me more toward how much I love DC. Because even if I didn't enjoy what the live action movies were doing, there was always the animated movies that were like, plus it's how I got really interested in like even the comic book storylines that I would pick up, because I'll be like, okay, I get the basic gist of the story. I like it. I'll pick up the book, because that way it's like I've given like less of a time investment. I can tell if I'm like really into the storyline in order to like before I make that much more like comprehensive time like investment. So just thank you for like for everything you've done.
Oh,
Seconded.
no.
Seconded.
Thanks you guys for because obviously we wouldn't be able to do this if nobody watched it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
So thank you guys, because it's there's nothing like it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's painful to do, but especially I feel like man, especially starting back in the 90s and stuff like that. Like animation was for cereal boxes and all that kind of stuff. Like all the stuff that kind of we're, you know what I mean, in the modern era, even on TV, right? It's dramatic. People are, there's consequences and stuff like that, right? And so that's why I loved working on, especially like the DC stuff, right? Because especially the direct-to-video stuff, they weren't trying to make it for kids per se,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, per se. So on that note, everyone, we're gonna wrap this up. Sam, thank you for coming back on the show. You're always welcome, obviously, and stay heroic, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, guys.